Good morning to everyone present here. This is Sadia Hasnan, a teacher of Sharon's Public School, is going to speak on the topic Child Psychology and Understanding Developmental Stages. How are children's life changing and what role do children's psychologists have in supporting children? Child psychology is a broad area covering how people change as they grow up from birth through to adolescence and trying to explain how these important changes occur. Are 3 years old, 7 years old, and teenagers different just because of the experiences of the world, or what role is played by biological changes within the individual? Because child psychology is so vast and tries to answer so many questions, researchers and practitioners often separate development into specific areas. Broadly, these tend to map into children's physical, cognitive, thinking, learning, memory, and social emotional development. Child psychologists attempt to make a sense of every aspect of child development, including how children learn, think, interact, and respond emotionally to those around them, make friends, understand emotions, and their own developing personalities, temperaments, and skills. Children typically reach development milestones. These milestones reflect abilities such as walking and talking and are achieved by most children at similar stages. Among other things, we are interested in trying to explain how children reach these milestones and how individual, social, and cultural factors may influence how we develop. Getting to know your child as they develop can be one of the most rewarding parts of being a parent. Learning how your child views the world, teaching your child new skills, and monitoring them as they progress with new feelings and changes to all part of being a parent. But it's not easy. As your child develops, they go through progressive development stages from birth into adulthood. Environmental, genetic, and cultural factors can all affect a child's development and how quickly they progress from one stage to the next. It's difficult for the children to explain what they are going through, much less to analyze their feelings. That's where child psychology can help to give highly important and valuable information. What is child psychology? Child psychology is a study of subconscious and conscious childhood development. Child psychologists observe how a child interacts and their parents, themselves, and the world to understand their mental development. Why it is important? Everyone wants their child to have healthy development, but it's not always clear if a child's behavior is a symptom of a normal stage in development or a sign of an abnormality. Child psychologists can help you understand the difference. Understanding the normal and abnormal psychological patterns of a child can help parents understanding how to best communicate and connect with their child. Teach their child coping mechanisms for managing emotions and help the child progress and thrive in each new development stage. Child psychologists can also identify abnormal behaviors early, help detect the root of common behavioral issues such as learning issues, hyperactivity or anxiety, and help children work through early childhood trauma. They can also help to prevent, evaluate, and diagnose development delays or abnormalities such as autism. And let us come to development of child psychology. It is a scientific study of how and why human beings change over the course of their life. Originally concerned with infants and children, the field has expanded to include adolescence, multi-development, aging, and the entire lifespan. Development psychologists aim to explain how thinking, feeling, and behaviors change throughout life. This field examines change across three major dimensions, that is, physical development, cognitive development, and social emotional development. Within these three dimensions are a broad range of topics. Includes motor skills, executive functions, moral understanding, language acquisition, social change, personality, emotional development, and self-concept and identity formation. Development psychology examines the influences of nature and nature of the processes of human development and processes of change in context across time. Many researchers are interested in the interactions among personal characteristics, the individual's behavior, and the environmental factors, including the social context and the built environment. Ongoing debates in regards to development psychology includes biological essentialism versus neuroplasticity and stages of development versus dynamic systems of development. Development psychology involves a range of fields such as educational psychology, child psychology, forensic developmental psychology, child development, cognitive psychology, and ecological psychology and cultural psychology. Influential development psychologists from the 20th century include Erik Erikson, Sigmund Freud, Jeans Jacques Rousseau, and John B. Watson are typically cited as providing the foundations for modern development psychology. In the mid-18th century, Jean-Jacques Rousseau described the three stages of developmental and adolescence. Rousseau's ideas were taken up strongly by educators at the time. Developmental psychology generally focuses on how and why certain changes occur over time in the course of human life. Many theories have been a profound contribution to this area of psychology. One of them, Erik Erikson, developed a model of 8 stages of psychological development. He believed that humans develop in stages throughout their lifetimes, and this would affect their behaviors. Psychosexual development. Sigmund Freud believed that everyone has a conscious, preconscious, and unconscious level of awareness. In the conscious, one is aware of their mental process. The preconscious involves formation through not currently in our thoughts can be brought into consciousness. Lastly, the unconsciousness includes mental processes that a person is unaware of. He believed that there is a tension between the conscious and unconscious because the conscious tries to hold back what the unconscious tries to express. To explain this, he developed 3 personality structures: the ID, ego, and superego. The ID, the most primitive of the 3, functions according to the pleasure principle: seek pleasure and avoid pain. Based on this, he proposed 5 universal stages of development that each is characterized by the erogenous zone, that is the source of child's psychosexual energy. The first is the oral stage, which occurs from birth to 12 months of age. During the oral stage, the libido is centered in a baby's mouth. The baby can suck. The second is the anal stage from 1 to 3 years of age. During the anal stage, the child defecates from the mouth and is often fascinated with the defecation. The theories of cognitive development. Jean Piaget, a Swiss theorist, posited that children learn by actively constructive knowledge through hands-on experience. He suggested that the adult's role is helping the child learn from to provide appropriate materials that the child can interact with and use to construct. He used Socratic questioning to get children to reflect on what they were doing, and he tried to get them to see contradictions in their explanations. Stages of moral development. Piaget claimed that the logic and morality develop through constructive stages. Expanding on Pigeon's work, Lawrence Kohlberg determined that the progress of moral development was principally concerned with justice and that it continued throughout the individual's lifetime. He suggested that three levels of moral reasoning, pre-conventional and moral reasoning, conventional moral reasoning, and post-conventional moral reasoning. The pre-conventional moral reasoning is typically of children and is characterized by reasoning that is based on rewards and punishment associated with different actions. Conventional moral reason occurs during late childhood and early adolescence and is characterized by reasoning based on rules and conventions of society. Lastly, post-conventional moral reasoning is a stage during which the individual sees society's rules and conventions as relative and subjective. Stages of psychosocial development. German-American psychologist Erik Erikson and his collaborator and wife John Erikson conceptualized 8 stages of psychosocial development, and they theorized healthy individuals pass through as they develop from infancy to adulthood. At each stage, the person must resolve a challenge or an existential dilemma. Successful resolution of the dilemma results in the person ingraining a positive virtue, but failure to resolve that the fundamental challenge of that stage reinforces negative perceptions of the person or the world around them, and the person's personal development is unable to progress. The first stage, trust versus mistrust, takes place in infancy. Positive virtue for the first stage is hope, in the infant learning whom to trust and having hope for a supportive group, people to be there for him. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt, with the positive virtue being will. This takes place in early childhood when the adult learns to become more independent by discovering what they are capable of, whereas if the child is overly controlled, feelings of inadequacy are reinforced, which can lead to low self-esteem and doubt. The third stage is initiative versus guilt. The virtue of being gained is a sense of purpose. This takes place primarily through play. This is the stage where the child will be curious and have many interactions with other kids. They will ask many questions as their curiosity grows. If too much guilt is present, the child may have a slower and harder time interacting with their world and other children in it. The fourth stage is industry versus inferiority. The virtue for the stage is competency and is the result of child's early experiences in school. This change is when the child will try to win the approval of others and understand the value of their accomplishments. The fifth stage is identity versus role confusion. The virtue gained is fidelity and it takes place in adolescence. This is when the child ideally starts to identify their place in society, particularly in terms of the gender role. The sixth stage is intimacy versus isolation, which happens in young adults, and the virtue gained in love. This is when the person starts to share his or her life with someone else intimately and emotionally. Not doing so can reinforce feelings of isolation. The seventh stage is generativity versus stagnation. This happens in adulthood and the virtue gained is care. A person becomes stable and starts to give back by raising a family and becoming involved in the community. The eighth stage is ego-integrity versus despair. When one grows old, they look back into their life and contemplate their successes and failures. If they resolve this positivity, the virtue of wisdom is gained. This is also the stage when one can gain a sense of closure and accept death without regret or fear. Stages based on the model of hierarchical complexity. Michael Commons enhanced and simplified Babel in Helder and Page's development theory and offers a standard method of examining the universal pattern of development. The model of hierarchy complexity is not based on the assessment of domain-specific information. It divides the audio of hierarchical complexity of tasks to be addressed from the stage performance of those tasks. In the MSc, there are three main axioms for an order to meet in order for a higher order task to coordinate the next lower order task. Axioms are rules that are followed to determine how the MSc orders action to form a hierarchy. Ecological systems theory. Ecological systems theory, originally formulated by Bronfenbrenner, specifies four types of nested environmental systems with bidirectional influences within and between the systems. The four systems are microsystem, mesosystem, and exosystem, and macrosystem. Each system contains rules, norms, and rules that can powerfully shape development. The microsystem is the direct environment in our lives, such as our homes and school. Mesosystem is how relationships connect to the microsystem. Exosystem is a larger social system where the child plays no role. Macrosystem refers to cultural values, customs, and laws of society. The microsystem is the immediate environment surrounding and influencing the individuals. The mesosystem is the combination of two microsystems and how they influence each other. The exosystem is the interaction among two or more settings that are indirectly linked in a school because he can no longer help with her homework. The macrosystem is broader, taking into account social, economic status, culture, beliefs, customs. Now come to zone of proximal development. Lev Vygotsky was a Russian theorist from the Soviet era who posited that the children learn through hands-on experience and social interactions with members of the culture. Patient, he claimed that timely and sensitive intervention by adults when a child is on the edge of learning a new task called the zone of proximal development could help the children learn new tasks. This adult role is often referred to as a skilled master, where the child is considered the learning apprentice through an educational process, often termed cognitive apprenticeship. Now, Constructivism. Constructivism is a paradigm in psychology that characterizes learning as a process of actively constructing knowledge. Individuals create meaning for themselves or make sense of a new information by selecting, organizing, and integrating information with other knowledge, often in the context of social interactions. Constructivism can occur in two ways, individual and social. Individual constructivism is when a person constructs knowledge through cognitive processes of their own experiences, rather than by memorizing facts provided by others. Social constructivism is when individuals construct knowledge through their interactive between the knowledge they bring to a situation and social or cultural exchanges within the contexts. Evolutionary development psychology. Evolutionary development psychology is a research paradigm that applies the basic principles of Darwinism evolution, particularly natural selection, to understand the development of human behavior and cognition. It involves the study of both the genetic and environmental mechanisms that underlie the development of social and cognitive competencies, as well as epigenetic processes that adapt these competencies to local conditions. EDP, that is Evolutionary Development Psychology, considers both the reliability developing species, typically features of ontogeny, as well as individuals' differences in behavior, form an evolutionary perspective, while evolutionary reviews tend to regard most individual differences as a result of either random genetic noise and idiosyncrasies, groups, educations, neighborhood, and chance of encounters, rather than products of national selection. Now come to attachment theory. Attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowley, focuses on the importance of open, intimate, emotionally meaningful relationships. Attachment is described as a biological system, a powerful survival impulse that evolved to ensure that the survival of the infant. A threatened or stressed child will move towards caretakers who create a sense of threatened, physical, emotional, and psychological safety for the individual. Attachment feeds on social contract and familiarity. Theorists have proposed four types of attachment styles: secure, anxious avoidant, anxious resistant, and disorganized. Secure attachment is a healthy attachment between the infant and the caregiver. It is, it is characterized by trust. Anxious avoidant in an insecure attachment between an infant and a caregiver. This is characterized by the infant's indifference towards the caregiver. Anxious resistant is an insecure attachment between the infant and the caregiver, characterized by distress from the infant when separated and anger when reunited. Disorganized is an attachment style without a consistent pattern of responses upon return of the parent. A child can be hindered in its natural tendency to form attachments. Some babies are raised without the stimulation and attention of a regular caregiver or locked upon under conditions of abuse or extreme negligence. The possible short-term effects of this deprivation are anger, despair, detachment, and temporary delay in intellectual development. Long-term effects include increased aggression, clinging behavior, detachment, and an increased risk of depression as an adult. Attachment is established in early childhood and attachment continues into adulthood when, when involved in intimate relationships. The way adults are able to handle relationship issues develops on the attachment styles that were formed during their childhood. An example of secure attachment continuing in adulthood would be whether the person feels confident and is able to meet their own needs. Having a secure attachment allows the adult to have a healthy, trusting relationship. An example of anxious attachment during adulthood is when the adult chooses a partner with anxious, avoidant attachment. Having an anxious, ambivalent attachment styles can affect an adult's trust issues in a committed relationship. By understanding what attachment style is, an individual formed with their caretaker giver when they were children, we can better understand their interpersonal relationships as adults. Now, nature versus nurture. A significant issue in developmental psychology is the relationship between innateness and environmental influence in regard to any particular aspect of development. This is often referred to as nature and nurture, or nativism versus empiricism. A nativist account of development would argue that the processes in question are innate, that is, they are specified by the organism's genes. An epicist's perspective would argue that those processes are required in interaction with the environment. Today, developmental psychologists rarely take such polarized positions with regard to most aspects of development. Rather, they investigate among many things the relationship between intimate and environmental influences on the ways this relationship has been exposed in recent years is through the emerging field of evolutionary developmental psychology. One area where this innateness debate has been prominently portrayed is in research of language acquisition. A major question in this area is whether or not certain properties of human language are specified genetically or can be acquired through learning. The empiricist's position on the issue of language acquisition suggests that the language input provides the necessary information acquired for learning the structure of language, and that infects acquired language through a process of statistical learning. From this perspective, language can be acquired through general learning methods that also apply to other aspects of development, such as perceptual learning. The nativist position argues that the input from the language is too improvised for infants and children to acquire the structure of language. Chomsky's criticism on the behaviorist model of language acquisition is regarded by many as a key turning point in the decline in the prominence of the theory of behaviorism generally. But Skinner's conception of verbal behavior has not died, perhaps in most because it has generated successful practical applications. One of the major discussions in development psychology includes whether development is discontinuous or continuous. Continuous development is quantifiable and quantitative, whereas discontinuous development is qualitative. Quantitative estimations of development can be measuring the stature of a child and measuring their memory or consideration span. Particularly, dramatic examples of qualitative changes are metamorphoses, such as emergence of a caterpillar into a butterfly. Those psychologists who bolster the continuous view of improvement propose that improvement includes slow and progressive changes all through the lifespan, with behavior within the prior stages of advancement giving the premise of abilities and capabilities required for the other stages. To many, the concept of continuous quantifiable measurement seems to be the essence of science. Not all psychologists, be that as it may, concur that advancement could be continuous processes. A few see advancement as a discontinuous process. They accept the advancement includes unmistakable and partition stages with diverse sorts of behavior happening in each organization. This process, that the development of certain capabilities in each range, such as particular feelings or way of considering, have a definite beginning and finishing point. Be that it may, there is no correct time at which a capacity abruptly shows up or disappears. Although some sorts of considering, feeling, or caring one should seem to be abruptly, it is more than likely that has been developing gradually for some time. Stage theories of development rest on the suspicion that the developmental may be discontinuous process, including particular stages which are characterized by subjective contrast in behavior. They moreover assume that the structure of the stages isn't variable concurrent to each person. In any case, the time of each arrangement may shift separately. Stage theories can be differentiated with Ceaseless Hypothesis, which said that development is an incremental process. Stability versus change. This issue involves the degree to which one becomes older renditions of their early experience or whether they develop into something different from who they were at the earlier point in development. It considers the extent to which early experiences or later experiences are the key determinants of a person's development. Most lifespan developmentalists recognize that extreme positions are unwise. Therefore, the key to a comprehensive, undergoing understanding of a development at any stage requires the interaction of different factors and not only one. Mathematical models. Developmental psychology is concerned not only with describing the characteristics of psychological change over time, but also seeks to explain the principles and internal workings underlying these changes. Psychologists have attempted to better understand these factors by using models. A model must simply account for the means by which a process takes place. This is sometimes done in references to change in the brain that may correspond to changes in behavior over the course of the development. Mathematically, modeling is useful in developmental psychology for implementing theory in a precise and easy to study manner, allowing generation, explanation, integration, and prediction of diverse phenomena. Cognitive development. Cognitive development is primarily concerned with the ways that infants and children acquire, develop, and use internal mental capabilities such as problem solving, memory, and language. Major topics in cognitive development are the study of language acquisition and the development of perpetual and motor skills. Paget was one of the influential early psychologists to study the developmental of cognitive abilities. His theory suggests that development proceeds through a sense of stages from infancy to adulthood, and that there is an end point or a goal. Other accounts, such as that of Lev Vygotsky, have suggested that development does not progress through stages, but rather that the developmental processes that begins at birth and continues until death is too complex for such structure and finality. Rather, from their viewpoint, developmental processes proceed more continuously. Thus, development should be analyzed instead of treated as a product to obtain. K. Warner has expanded the study of cognitive development in adulthood rather than being stable from adolescence. Most cognitive development has integrated the considerations of cognitive psychology and the psychology of individual differences into the interpretation and modeling of development. Specifically, the new Pagetian theories of cognitive development showed that the successive levels or stages of cognitive development are associated with increasing processes efficiency and working memory capacity. These increases explain differences between stages, progression to higher stages, and individual differences of children who are the same age and of the same grade level. However, Other theories have moved away from pageantial stage theories and are influenced by accounts of domain-specific information processing, which posit that development is guided by innate, evolutionarily specified and content-specific information processing mechanisms. Now come to social and emotional development. Developmental psychologists who are interested in social development examine how individuals develop social and emotional competencies. For example, they study how children form friendships, how they understand and deal with emotions, and how identity develops. Research in this area may involve study of the relationship between cognition or cognitive development and social behavior. Emotional regulation refers to an individual's ability to modulate emotional responses across a variety of contexts. In young children, this modulation is a part of control externally by parents and other authority figures. As children develop, they take on more and more responsibility for their internal state. Studies have shown that the development of that is emotional regulation, is affected by the emotional regulation children observe in parents and caretakers, the emotional climate in the home, and the reaction of parents and caretakers to the child's emotion. Music also has an influence on stimulating and enhancing the senses of a child through self-expression. A child's social and emotional development can be disrupted by motor coordination problems, evidenced by the environmental stress hypothesis. The environmental hypothesis explains how children with coordination problems and developmental coordination disorder are exposed to several psychosocial consequences which act as secondary stressors, leading to an increase in internalizing symptoms such as depression and anxiety. Motor coordination problems affect fine and gross motor movement as well as perpetual motor skills. Secondary stresses commonly identified include the tendency for children with poor motor skills to be less likely to participate in organized play with other children and more likely to feel socially isolated. Physical development. Physical development concerns the physical maturation of an individual's body until it reaches the adult stature. Although physical growth is a highly regular process, all children differ tremendously in the timing of their growth spurts. Studies are being done to analyze how the differences in these timings affect and are related to other variables of developmental psychology such as information processing speed. Traditional measures of physical maturity using X-rays are less in practice nowadays compared to simple measurements of body parts such as height, weight, head, circumference, and arm span. A few other studies and practices with physical developmental psychology are the phonological abilities of mature 5 to 11 years old and the controversial hypothesis of left-handers being nationally delayed compared to right-handers. Memory development. Researchers interested in memory development look at the way our memory develops from childhood and onward. According to fuzzy trace theory, people have two separate memory processes, verbatim and gist. These two traces begin to develop at different times as well as at a different pace. Children as young as 4 years old have verbatim memory, memory for surface information which increases up to early adulthood at which point it begins to decline. On the other hand, our capacity for just memory for systematic information increases up to early adulthood, at which point it is consistent through old age. Furthermore, one's reliance on just memory traces increases at one's ages. Developmental psychologists have a number of methods to study changes in individuals over time. Common research methods include systematic observations, including naturalistic observation or structured observation, self-aspects, which could be clinical interviews or structured interviews, clinically or case study method. These methods differ in the extent of control researches impose on study conditions and how they contrast ideas about which variables to study. Every developmental investigation can be characterized in terms of whether it is underlying strategy involves the experimental, correlational, or case study approach. The experimental method involves actual manipulation of various treatments, circumstances, or events to which the participant or subject is exposed. The experimental design points to cause and effect relationships. This method allows for the strong inferences to be made of causal relationships between the manipulation of one or more independent variables and subsequent behavior, as measured by the dependent variable. The advantage of using this research method is that it permits determination of cause and effect relationships among the variables. On the other hand, the intimation is that data obtained in an artificial environment may lack generalizability. The correlational method explores the relationship between two or more events by gathering information about these variables without researchers' intervention. The advantage of using a correlational design is that it estimates the strength and direction of relationships among variables in the natural environment. However, limitation is that it does not permit determination of cause and effect relationships among variables. The case study approach allows investigation to obtain in-depth understanding of an individual participant by collecting data based on interviews, structures, questionnaires, observation, and test scores. Each of these methods have its strength and weakness by the experimental method and when appropriate in the preferred method of developmental scientists because it provides a controlled situation and the conclusions to be drawn about cause and effect relationships. Research designs. In a longitudinal study, a researcher observes many individuals born at around the same time and carries out new observations as members of a cohort age. This method can be used to draw conclusions about which types of development are universal and occur in most members of cohort. As an example, a longitudinal study of early literacy development examined in detail the early literacy experiences of one child in each of 30 families. Researchers may also observe ways that development varies between individuals and hypothesize about the causes of variation in their data. Longitudinal studies often require large amounts of time and refunding, making them unfeasible in some conditions. Also, because members of cohort all experience historical events unique to their generation, apparently Normative development trends may, in fact, be universal only to their cohort. In a cross-sectional study, a researcher observes differences between individuals of different ages at the same time. This generally requires fewer resources than the longitudinal method, and because the individuals come from different cohorts, shared historical events are not so much of a confounding factor. By the same token, however, cross-sectional research may not be the most effective way to study differences between participants, as these differences may result not from their different ages but from the exposure to different historical events. As third study design, the consequential design combines both methodologies. Here, a researcher observes different members of different birth cohorts at the same time and then tracks all participants over time, charting changes in the groups. Because every method has some weakness, developmental psychologists rarely rely on one study or even one method to reach conclusions by finding consistent evidence from as many converging sources as possible. Life stages of psychological development includes prenatal development. Prenatal development is of interest to psychologists investigating the context of early psychological development. The whole prenatal development involves the three main stages. They are germinal stage, embryonic stage, and fetal stage. Germinal stage begins at a conceptual until 2 weeks. Embryonic stage means the development from 2 weeks to 8 weeks. Fetal stage represents 9 weeks until birth of the baby. The senses develop in the womb itself. A fetus can both see and hear by the second trimester, 13 to 24 weeks of age. The sense of touch develops in the embryonic stage 5 to 8 weeks. Most of the brain's billions of neurons are also developed by the second trimester. Babies are hence born with some odor, taste, and sound preferences largely related to the mother's environment. Some primitive reflexes too arise before birth and are still present in newborns. One hypothesis is that these reflexes are vestigial and have limited use in early human. Page's theory of cognitive development suggests that some early reflexes are building blocks for infant sensorimotor development. For example, the tonic neck reflex may development by the bringing object into the infant's field of view. Other reflexes, such as walking reflex, appear to be replaced by more sophisticated voluntary control later in infancy. This may be because the infant gains too much weight after birth to be strong enough to use the reflex, or because the reflex and subsequent development are functionally different. It has also been suggested that some reflexes, the moro or the walking reflexes, are predominantly adaptations to life in the womb with little connection to early infant development. Primitive reflexes reappear in the adults under certain conditions, such as neurological conditions like dementia or traumatic lesions. Ultrasound have shown that the infants are capable of range of movements in the womb, many of which appear to be more than simple reflexes. Several environmental agents, teratogens, can cause damage during the prenatal period. These include prescription and non-prescriptional drugs, illegal drugs, tobacco, alcohol, environmental pollutants, infectious diseases such as Rubella virus and the toxoplasmosis parasite, maternal malnutrition, maternal emotional stress, an RH factor, blood incompatibility between mother and child. There are many studies which prove the effects of the aforementioned substances. Infancy. From birth until the first year, the child is referred to as an infant. Developmental psychologists vary widely in the assessment of baby-infant psychology and the influence the outside world has upon it, but certain aspects are relatively clear. The majority of the newborn infant time is spent in sleep. At first, this sleep is evenly spread throughout the day and night. After a couple of months, infants generally become diurnal. Infant perception. Vision is significantly worse in infants than in older children. Infant sight tends to be blurry in early stages but improves over time. Color perception similar to that seen in adults have been demonstrated in infants as young as 4 months using habituation methods. Hearing is well developed prior to birth. Unlike vision, newborns prefer complex sounds to pure tones. Human speech to other sounds, mother's voice to other voices, and the native language to other languages. Smell and taste are present, with infants showing different expressions or disgust or pleasure when presented with pleasant odors, honey, milk, etc., or unpleasant odors, rotten egg, and taste. Newborns are born with odor and taste, preferences acquired in the womb from the smell and taste of amniotic fluid in turn, influenced by what the mother eats. Both breastfeeding and bottle-fed babies around 3 days old prefer the smell of human milk to that of formula, indicating an innate preference. Touch and feel. It is one of the better developed senses of birth at birth as it is one of the first senses to develop inside the womb. This is evidenced by the primitive reflexes described above and the relatively advanced development. Pain. Infants feel pain similarly, if not more strongly, than older children, but pain relief in infants have not received so much attention as an area of research. Infant cognition. Pageant suggested that an infant's perception and understanding of the world depended on their motor development, which was required for the infant to link visual, tactile, and motor presentations of objects. According to this view, it is through touching and handling objects that infants develop object permanence. Developmental delays. Studies have been done to look at the differences in children who have developmental delays versus typically development. Normally, when being compared to one another, mental age is not taken into consideration. There still may be differences in developmentally delayed children versus typically development, behavioral, emotional, and other mental disorders. When compared to MA children, there is a bigger difference between normal development behaviors overall. Toddlerhood. Infants shift between ages of 1 and 2 to a development stage known as toddlerhood. In this stage, the infant's transition into toddlerhood is highlighted through self-awareness, developing maturity in language use, and presence of memory and imagination. During toddlerhood, babies begin they learn how to walk, talk, and make decisions for themselves. An important characteristic of this age period is the development of language, where children are learning how to communicate and express their emotions and desires through the use of vocal sounds, babbling, and eventually words. Self-control also begins to develop. At this age, children take initiative to explore, experimental, and learn more, making mistakes. Caretakers who encourage toddlers to try new things and test their limits help the children become autonomous, self-reliant, and self-confident. If the caretaker is overprotective or disapproving of independent actions, the toddler may begin to doubt their abilities and feel ashamed of the desire for independence. Childhood. Play age 3 to 5. In the earliest years, children are completely dependent on the age of others, on the care of others. Therefore, they develop a social relationship with their caregivers and later with family members during their preschool 3 to 5. They enlarge their social horizons to include people outside the family. The motor skills of preschoolers increase so they can do more things for themselves. They become more independent, no longer completely dependent on the care of others. The world of this age group expands. More people have a role in shaping their individuals' personalities. Preschoolers explore and question their world. Play is a major activity for group 3 to 5. For patients through play, a child reaches higher levels of cognitive development. Middle childhood ages 6 to 12. For Erik Erikson, the psychosocial crisis during middle childhood is industry versus inferiority, which is successfully met. In all cultures, middle childhood is a time. Adolescence is the period of life between the onset of puberty and the full commitment to an adult social role, such as worker, parent, and citizen. It is a period known for the formation of personal and social identity and the discovery of moral purposes. Early adulthood. Early adulthood generally refers to the period between 18 to 29 years, and according to theories, Erikson is a stage where development is mainly focused on maintaining relationships. Middle adulthood. Middle adulthood generally refers to the period between 29 to 49. During this period, middle-aged adults experience a conflict between generativity and stagnation. They may either feel a sense of contributing to society, the next generation, or the immediate community, or develop the sense of purposelessness. Physically, the middle age experience a decline in muscular strength, reaction time. Old age. Physically, older people experience a decline in muscular strength, reaction time, stamina, hearing, distance perception, and the sense of smell. They are also more susceptible to diseases such as cancer and pneumonia due to the weak immune system. Programs aimed at balanced muscle strength and mobility have been shown to reduce disability among medically disabled elderly. Parenting. All parents, have their own parenting styles. Parenting style, according to Kimberly Comco, are based upon two aspects of parenting behavior: control and warmth. Parenting control refers to the degree to which parents manage their children's behavior. Parental warmth refers to the degree to which parents are accepting and responsive to their children's behavior. Parenting style. The following parenting styles have been described in the child development literature. Authoritative parenting is characterized as parents who have high parental warmth, responsiveness, and demandingness, but rate low in negativity and conflict. Permissive parenting is characterized by high levels of responsiveness combined with low levels of demandingness. Mother and father factors is in successful parenting, and that single parents as well as homosexual couples can support positive child outcomes. According to this set of research, children need at least one consistently responsible adult with whom the child can have a positive emotional connection. Having more than one of these contributes to a higher likelihood of a positive child outcomes. Divorce. Another parental factor, often debated in terms of its effects on child development, is divorce. Divorce in itself is not determining factor of negative child outcomes. In fact, the majority of children from divorcing families fall into the normal range of measures of psychological and cognitive functioning. A number of mediating factors play a role in determining the effects of cognitive functioning. For example, divorcing families with young children often face harsher consequences in terms of demographic, social, and emotional changes than do families with older children. Positive co-parenting after divorce is a part of pattern associated with the positive children coping with hostile parenting behaviors lead to the constructive parent leading children at risk. Additionally, direct parenting relationship with the child also affects the development of child after a divorce. Overall, protective factors facilitating positive child development after a divorce are maternal bond, positive father-child relationship, and cooperation between parents. Thank you everybody for joining here, and that's all for today. Thank you.